My name is Kyle Harrison, and what I'm about to tell you is the story that shattered my world and rebuilt it from the ground up. It's a story of love, betrayal, and the most devastating presentation I've ever given in my life. This happened in the suburbs of Orlando, Florida, where I thought I had built the perfect American dream. 22 years ago, I married Rebecca Charlotte Williams, the most beautiful woman I had ever laid eyes on. She had this cascading auburn hair that caught the sunlight like spun gold, emerald green eyes that seemed to hold entire conversations, and a smile that could make you forget your own name. We met at the University of Central Florida, where she was studying nursing and I was finishing my business degree with a focus on logistics management. Our courtship was like something out of a romantic movie. Late-night study sessions that turned into deep conversations about our dreams, weekend trips to the beach where we'd walk hand in hand for hours, and that magical moment when I proposed to her on the same pier where we had our first official date. She said yes with tears streaming down her face, and I genuinely believed I was the luckiest man alive. The early years of our marriage were everything I had dreamed of and more. We bought a modest two-story colonial house in Winter Park, with a white picket fence and a garden where Rebecca spent her weekends planting roses and daisies. I worked my way up at Morrison Logistics, starting as a warehouse coordinator and eventually becoming a regional operations manager. Rebecca worked at Orlando General Hospital, where she quickly became known as one of the most compassionate and skilled nurses in the cardiac unit. We had plans, oh how many plans we had. We were going to travel to Europe for our 5th anniversary, renovate the kitchen, maybe get a golden retriever, and most importantly, start a family. We spent countless evenings lying in bed, talking about what we'd name our children, what sports they might play, whether they'd have my dark hair or her beautiful auburn locks. But life, as it often does, had different plans for us. After 3 years of trying to conceive, we finally sought medical help. The tests were exhaustive, invasive, and emotionally draining. When the results came back, the doctor delivered the news with the kind of clinical detachment that medical professionals use to protect themselves from the emotional weight of their words. I had a condition that made it highly unlikely we'd ever conceive naturally. I'll never forget the drive home that day. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, not saying a word. When we got home, she went straight to the bedroom and closed the door. I found her hours later, curled up on our bed, clutching one of the baby blankets her mother had crocheted for our future children. "It's not your fault," she whispered when she finally spoke. "It's nobody's fault." But I knew she was just being kind. Deep down, I could see something change in her eyes that day. Not anger, not resentment, but something worse, a kind of resigned disappointment that seemed to settle into the very foundation of our relationship. We tried to move forward. We looked into adoption, fertility treatments, even considered surrogacy. But each avenue seemed more complicated and expensive than the last. Meanwhile, Rebecca threw herself into her work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She started taking extra shifts, volunteering for the most challenging cases, and pursuing additional certifications. "Work keeps me busy," she'd say when I expressed concern about her long hours. "It helps me not think about, you know." I supported her completely. How could I not? I felt like I had failed her as a husband, failed to give her the one thing she wanted most in the world. If work was her way of coping, then I would make sure she had all the space and support she needed. Around our 10th anniversary, things began to stabilize somewhat. We had accepted our childless fate and started to rebuild our relationship around new shared interests. We took cooking classes together, started a small wine collection, and planned elaborate vacations to places we'd always wanted to see. We went to Italy for our 15th anniversary, where Rebecca seemed more relaxed and happy than she'd been in years. But looking back now, I realize that's when the changes really began. It started subtly. Rebecca began working more night shifts, claiming that the hospital was short-staffed and offering excellent overtime pay. She joined a book club with some of her nursing colleagues, which met twice a week and occasionally organized weekend retreats. She also started volunteering at a free clinic across town on her days off. "I feel like I need to give back," she explained when I questioned the additional commitment. "There are so many people who can't afford proper health care." I admired her compassion. It was one of the things that had made me fall in love with her in the first place. So when she started spending more time away from home, I chalked it up to her generous spirit and her need to feel useful in ways that our childless marriage couldn't provide. The book club meetings seemed to run later and later. Sometimes she wouldn't get home until nearly midnight, claiming they'd gotten caught up in intense discussions about whatever novel they were reading. When I asked about the books, she'd give me vague summaries that sounded rehearsed. "You should read The Bridges of Madison County," she suggested once. "It's about a woman who has to choose between duty and passion." I remember thinking that was an odd recommendation, but I was busy with my own work challenges at the time. Morrison Logistics was expanding into new territories, and I was putting in 60-hour weeks trying to manage the transition. The weekend retreats became more frequent too. Rebecca would pack a small bag and disappear for entire weekends, returning on Sunday evenings with stories about hiking trails, spa treatments, and deep conversations with her book club friends. She'd show me photos on her phone, group shots of women I didn't recognize, scenic mountain views, cozy cabin interiors. "You should come with me sometime," she'd say, but when I expressed interest, there was always a reason why it wouldn't work out. The retreat was women only, or it was already full, or it was scheduled during a time when I had important work commitments. Around our 18th anniversary, Rebecca also became close friends with a woman named Liz Martinez, who had recently gone through a messy divorce. Liz, according to Rebecca, was struggling emotionally and financially, and Rebecca felt obligated to help her through this difficult time. "She doesn't have anyone else," Rebecca would explain when she spent entire evenings at Liz's apartment. "Her ex-husband turned all their mutual friends against her, and her family lives in Puerto Rico. I'm all she has right now." 2 or 3 times a week, Rebecca would get calls from Liz during dinner, crying about her loneliness, her financial struggles, or her difficulty adjusting to single life. Rebecca would always take these calls, even if we were in the middle of a conversation or watching a movie together. "I'll be right over," she'd say, grabbing her keys and purse. "She really needs me tonight." I found myself eating a lot of dinners alone during those years. The most troubling change, though, was in our physical relationship. Rebecca and I had always had a strong connection in that regard, even after the disappointment of our fertility issues. But gradually, intimacy became less frequent, less passionate. She always had headaches, or she was exhausted from work, or she was stressed about something happening at the hospital. When we did make love, she seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at the ceiling afterward with a look I couldn't quite identify. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd force a smile and say she was just tired. I told myself it was normal. We'd been married for nearly 2 decades. Passion naturally evolved into companionship. This was just the natural progression of a long-term relationship. But deep down, a part of me knew something was wrong. I just couldn't put my finger on what it was. The revelation came 3 months ago, on a Saturday morning in late spring. I was cleaning out our garage, something I'd been putting off for months. Rebecca was at her weekly volunteer shift at the free clinic, and I figured it was the perfect time to tackle the overwhelming collection of boxes we'd accumulated over the years. Most of it was junk, old college textbooks, outdated electronics, seasonal decorations we never used. But in a dusty corner, behind a stack of Christmas ornaments, I found a medium-sized cardboard box that I didn't recognize. It wasn't labeled, and it felt surprisingly heavy for its size. Inside, I found a collection of Rebecca's old belongings, jewelry I hadn't seen her wear in years, a few books from nursing school, some photo albums from before we were married, and at the bottom, her old cell phone from about 2 years ago. Rebecca had upgraded to a new phone when her contract expired, and she'd mentioned something about keeping the old one as a backup. I remembered helping her transfer her photos and contacts to the new device, but apparently this one had been forgotten in storage. The phone was completely dead, but I found the charger coiled up in the same box. Something, I still can't say what, made me plug it in. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was that nagging feeling I'd been carrying around for months that something in my marriage wasn't quite right. While the phone charged, I continued organizing the garage. But every few minutes, my eyes would drift back to that small black device sitting on my workbench. When it finally powered on, the startup screen displayed a photo of Rebecca and me from our vacation to Napa Valley 3 years ago. We looked so happy in that picture, toasting with glasses of wine at a vineyard overlooking the valley. The phone was still using the same passcode Rebecca had always used, our wedding date, 0615. I felt a pang of guilt as I entered the numbers. This felt like a violation of her privacy, and in 22 years of marriage, I'd never snooped through her personal belongings. But I was already committed to the path I'd started down. At first, everything seemed normal. Text messages about work schedules, grocery lists, reminders about doctor's appointments. Photos from our vacations, family gatherings, and random moments from our daily life. I started to feel foolish for even looking. Then I noticed a folder in her photo gallery that I didn't remember from when we transferred her data. It was buried several levels deep in the menu system, labeled simply as Miscellaneous 2019 to 2021. Something about that innocuous label sent a chill down my spine. When I opened it, my world collapsed. The first photo was of Rebecca in a hotel room I didn't recognize, wearing lingerie I'd never seen before. She was smiling at the camera in a way that was both intimate and playful, the kind of smile she used to give me during our early years together. But she wasn't alone in the photo. There was a man's hand visible in the frame, resting on her shoulder. In the background, I could see masculine clothes draped over a chair and a man's watch on the nightstand. My hands were shaking as I scrolled to the next image. This one was worse. Rebecca was kissing someone, a tall man with dark hair and broad shoulders. They were in what looked like the same hotel room, and the timestamp showed it was taken on a Saturday afternoon about 18 months ago. I remembered that day because Rebecca had told me she was attending a nursing conference in Tampa. I kept scrolling and each image was like a punch to the gut. Rebecca with different men in different locations. Hotel rooms, someone's apartment, even what looked like the back seat of a car. Some photos were intimate moments, others were more explicit. All of them were of my wife with men who weren't me. The timestamps told a story that made me physically sick. These photos spanned almost 3 years, from late 2019 to early 2022. While I had been working overtime to pay for her continuing education courses, while I had been supporting her volunteer work and understanding about her need for space to process our childlessness, she had been living an entirely separate life. I recognized some of the faces. Marcus Patterson, who had been one of my groomsmen and was still someone I considered a close friend. He appeared in at least a dozen photos. Dr. Rodriguez from her hospital, I'd met him at several hospital holiday parties, and Rebecca had always spoken highly of his mentorship. Jake Coleman, our neighbor from 2 streets over, whose wife had died from cancer 3 years ago. But there were others I didn't recognize, younger men, older men, men who looked like they could be patients or colleagues or strangers she'd met somewhere during her extensive time away from home. As I continued scrolling through what felt like an endless catalog of betrayal, I found text message screenshots that she had apparently saved as photos. Conversations with these men, making plans to meet, expressing feelings that she had never expressed to me, sharing intimate details about our marriage and our personal struggles. One conversation with Marcus particularly gutted me. "Kyle has no idea," Rebecca had written. "He's so focused on work and so guilty about the kids thing that he doesn't notice anything else." Marcus had replied, "Don't you feel bad about it?" "I felt bad at first," she responded. "But I deserve to feel desired. I deserve to feel alive. Kyle makes me feel like a failure because I can't get pregnant. With you, I feel like a woman again." I had to stop reading. I rushed to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left in my stomach. When I finally composed myself enough to return to the phone, I discovered that the most recent photos were from just 2 years ago, around the time she got her new phone. But that didn't mean the affairs had ended. It probably just meant she'd gotten more careful about documenting them. For the next 3 hours, I sat in my garage, going through every single image, every text message, every piece of evidence of my wife's double life. By the time I was finished, I had counted at least 7 different men across a span of nearly 3 years. The book club meetings, the weekend retreats, the volunteer work, the time spent comforting her divorced friend Liz, it had all been an elaborate web of lies designed to give her the freedom to pursue relationships with other men. When Rebecca came home that evening, I was sitting at our kitchen table, drinking a beer and trying to process what I'd discovered. She walked in with her usual cheerful demeanor, kissed my cheek and started telling me about her day at the clinic. "We had this elderly gentleman come in with chest pains," she said, moving around the kitchen to prepare dinner. "Turned out he'd been skipping his heart medication because he couldn't afford it. We were able to connect him with a program that'll cover the cost. It's so rewarding to help people like that." I watched her as she spoke, noting the genuine warmth in her voice, the way her face lit up when she talked about helping others. This was the woman I'd fallen in love with, compassionate, caring, dedicated to making the world a better place. And she was also a stranger who had been systematically lying to me for years. "That's wonderful, honey," I managed to say. "I'm proud of you for making a difference." She smiled and continued preparing our meal, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire understanding of our marriage had been shattered just a few hours earlier. That night, as Rebecca slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do next. My first instinct was to wake her up and confront her immediately. I wanted to scream, to demand explanations, to force her to look at those photos and explain how she could betray 22 years of marriage. But I knew Rebecca well enough to understand that approach would be a mistake. She was incredibly intelligent and remarkably good at thinking on her feet. If I confronted her without a plan, she'd find a way to minimize the evidence, explain away the photos, and possibly even convince me that I was overreacting or misunderstanding the situation. No, I needed to be strategic about this. I needed to think it through carefully. Over the next few days, I found it almost impossible to act normal around Rebecca. Every kiss felt like a lie, every "I love you" felt like mockery, every casual conversation about our day felt like elaborate theater. But somehow, I managed to maintain the facade while I figured out my next steps. I started paying closer attention to Rebecca's behavior, looking for patterns I might have missed before. Sure enough, the signs had been there all along. The new lingerie that she claimed was for her own confidence but never wore around me. The subtle changes in her grooming habits. She'd started getting manicures and professional eyebrow shaping, things she'd never bothered with during our early years together. The way she guarded her new phone, always keeping it face down and taking it with her even when she went to the bathroom. I also noticed that she'd become more critical of me in small ways. Comments about my weight gain, suggestions that I should update my wardrobe, observations that I'd become boring and too focused on routine. At the time, I'd taken these as constructive feedback from a loving wife. Now I realized they were probably comparisons to the other men in her life. About a week after my discovery, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to hire a private investigator. I'd never imagined I'd be the type of husband who spied on his wife, but I needed more information. The photos on the old phone were damning, but they were also 2 years old. I needed to know if the affairs were still ongoing, who was involved, and how extensive the deception really was. I found a firm called Palmetto Investigations through an online search. The owner, a former police detective named Frank Morrison, met me at a coffee shop near my office the following Tuesday. Frank was exactly what you'd expect from a private investigator, middle-aged, weathered face, the kind of person who blended into crowds without effort. He listened to my story without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. "I've been doing this for 15 years, he said when I finished explaining the situation. "I've seen it all and nothing surprises me anymore. But I want you to understand something before we proceed. Once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss." "I already know enough to understand that my marriage is over," I told him. "Now I just need to know the full extent of what I'm dealing with." Frank nodded. "Fair enough. Let me ask you this, what's your ultimate goal here? Are you looking for evidence to use in divorce proceedings? Do you want to confront your wife? Are you hoping to reconcile?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. "I want the truth," I said finally. "All of it. And then I want her to face the consequences of her choices." Frank charged $150 per hour plus expenses. It seemed like a lot of money, but I figured it was a small price to pay for peace of mind and closure. For the next 3 weeks, Frank followed Rebecca during her times away from home. He photographed her meetings, documented her activities, and confirmed what I already suspected. The affairs were still ongoing. Rebecca was currently involved with at least 3 different men on a regular basis. Dr. Rodriguez from the hospital, Marcus Patterson, my former groomsman, and a man named Trevor Walsh who worked as a personal trainer at a gym across town. Frank's report was thorough and devastating. Rebecca met Dr. Rodriguez at hotels during her supposed overtime shifts. Marcus would pick her up at the mall parking lot on some Saturday afternoons when she claimed to be shopping with girlfriends. Trevor was apparently her Tuesday and Thursday evening appointment, during the time she claimed to be at book club meetings. The friend Liz Martinez did exist, and Rebecca did visit her occasionally. But more often, helping Liz was code for meeting one of her other relationships. Sometimes she'd actually go to Liz's apartment first, then leave to meet someone else, using Liz's place as an alibi location. The weekend retreats were the most elaborate deception. Rebecca would check into hotels with one or more of these men, spending entire weekends living out some fantasy version of her life where she wasn't married to me. Frank had photos, credit card records. Rebecca had apparently opened a separate account that I didn't know about, and even some audio recordings of conversations between Rebecca and her lovers. When he presented me with the final report, Frank looked genuinely sympathetic. "I'm sorry, Kyle," he said. "I wish I could tell you this was just a misunderstanding or a brief mistake. But based on what I've documented, this has been going on for at least 4 years, possibly longer." 4 years. 4 years of elaborate lies, careful planning, and deliberate deception. While I'd been beating myself up for not being able to give her children, she'd been building relationships with multiple other men. While I'd been working extra hours to pay for her continuing education and volunteer activities, she'd been using that freedom to pursue her secret life. That night, I sat in my study looking at Frank's report, trying to process the full scope of Rebecca's betrayal. It wasn't just the physical affairs, though those were devastating enough. It was the systematic lying, the manipulation of my guilt about our childlessness, the way she'd used my love and trust as tools to enable her deception. I thought about all the nights I'd fallen asleep feeling grateful that I had such a compassionate, dedicated wife. All the times I'd bragged to friends and colleagues about Rebecca's volunteer work and her commitment to helping others. All the moments when I'd felt lucky to be married to someone who was so much better than I deserved. It had all been a lie. But as I sat there drowning in anger and betrayal, another emotion began to emerge: determination. Rebecca thought she was smarter than me. She thought I was too trusting, too focused on work, too consumed by guilt to notice what was happening right under my nose. For 4 years she'd been right. But now I knew the truth, and I was going to make sure she faced the consequences of her choices. I started planning what would later become known among my friends and family as the presentation. Our 22nd wedding anniversary was just 6 weeks away, and Rebecca had already started planning a big celebration. She'd reserved a private room at our favorite restaurant and invited 35 people. Both of our families, close friends, colleagues from both our jobs, and neighbors. "It's such a milestone," she'd said when she first proposed the idea. 22 years of marriage is something to be proud of. We should celebrate with everyone who's been part of our journey. The irony wasn't lost on me. But as I thought about the anniversary party, I realized it presented a perfect opportunity. Rebecca wanted to celebrate our marriage in front of everyone who mattered to us. Fine. Let's celebrate. Let's show everyone exactly what our marriage had been for the past 4 years. I started working on the presentation immediately. Using the photos from Rebecca's old phone and some of the evidence Frank had gathered, I began creating what I thought of as the real story of our marriage. I was meticulous about it. I organized the material chronologically, showing how the affairs had evolved over time. I included photos, text message screenshots, and even some of the financial records showing Rebecca's secret spending on hotels and gifts for her lovers. But I wasn't just interested in exposing her infidelity. I wanted to show the complete picture of how she'd manipulated me, our friends, and our families to enable her double life. I created slides showing Rebecca's supposed schedule versus her actual activities. On one side would be a calendar showing her claimed commitments: book club, volunteer work, helping Liz, overtime shifts. On the other side would be photos and evidence of what she was actually doing during those times. I included quotes from her text messages where she mocked my trust and described me as clueless and easy to manipulate. I showed how she'd used my guilt about our inability to have children as emotional cover for her affairs. The presentation was set to music our wedding song, "At Last" by Etta James. The song that had once represented the beginning of our life together would now soundtrack the reveal of how completely that life had been built on lies. As the anniversary approached, I found myself almost giddy with anticipation. Rebecca was so excited about the party, constantly talking about how wonderful it would be to have everyone together to celebrate our lasting love. She'd bought a new dress for the occasion, a stunning blue cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She'd made appointments for a massage, a manicure, and a professional blowout at the salon. "I want to look perfect for our special night," she said, admiring herself in the mirror while trying on the dress. "This is going to be such a magical evening." Yes, it was going to be magical. Just not in the way she was expecting. The day of our anniversary arrived on a beautiful Saturday evening in early June. Our house was transformed for the occasion. Rebecca had hired caterers, decorated with white roses and candlelight, and even arranged for a photographer to document the evening. Guests started arriving at 6 o'clock. My parents had flown in from Phoenix, where they'd retired 5 years earlier. Rebecca's brother James drove down from Atlanta with his wife and 2 teenage daughters. Marcus Patterson arrived with his wife Sarah, who hugged me warmly and commented on how wonderful Rebecca looked. If only she knew, I thought. Dr. Rodriguez came with his wife of 30 years, an elegant woman who worked as a pediatrician. Trevor Walsh wasn't invited, of course. Rebecca couldn't risk having too many of her lovers in the same room at once. The early part of the evening went exactly as Rebecca had planned. People mingled, shared stories about our marriage, and offered toasts to our enduring love. Rebecca was radiant, moving through the crowd like a gracious hostess, accepting compliments on her appearance and our beautiful home. I played my part perfectly. I smiled, made small talk, and accepted congratulations on reaching 22 years of marriage. Several people commented on how lucky I was to have such a devoted wife. "Rebecca is truly one in a million," said my mother, squeezing my arm. "You found yourself a real keeper." "She's definitely unique," I agreed. At 8:30, Rebecca clinked a knife against her wine glass to get everyone's attention. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," she began, her voice warm and emotional. Kyle and I are so grateful to be surrounded by the people we love most. Marriage isn't always easy, but having the support of family and friends like you makes all the difference. There was a murmur of appreciation from the crowd. Before we serve dessert, Rebecca continued, Kyle has prepared a special presentation for all of us. He's been working on it for weeks and I know it's going to be absolutely beautiful. She looked at me with such genuine affection that for a moment, I almost felt guilty about what I was about to do. Almost. I stood up and moved to the front of the room, where I'd set up a laptop connected to a large television screen. Thank you all for being here tonight, I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. 22 years ago, Rebecca and I stood in front of God and all of you and made promises to each other. We promised to love, honor, and cherish each other, in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others until death do us part. I paused and looked around the room. Everyone was smiling, anticipating a romantic trip down memory lane. Tonight, I want to show you how well we've kept those promises. I clicked to the first slide, which showed our wedding photo. Rebecca in her beautiful white gown, me in my tuxedo, both of us young and radiant with hope for the future. This is where our story began, I said. Two people deeply in love, ready to build a life together. The next few slides showed our early years, our first apartment, vacation photos, holidays with family. I narrated each image, talking about our dreams and plans for the future. Rebecca was beaming, clearly enjoying this walk through our shared history. Several guests were already getting emotional, and I heard someone whisper about what a romantic gesture this was. Then I clicked to a slide that changed everything. It was a photo of Rebecca with Dr. Rodriguez in a hotel room, both of them partially undressed and kissing passionately. The timestamp in the corner showed it was taken 18 months ago. The room fell completely silent. For a moment, I don't think anyone processed what they were seeing. This is Dr. Rodriguez, I said conversationally as if I was introducing a vacation photo. Most of you know him from the hospital where Rebecca works. What you might not know is that they've been having an affair for over 3 years. The silence erupted into chaos. Someone gasped loudly. I heard a chair scrape across the floor as someone stood up abruptly. Rebecca's face had gone completely white. Kyle, stop, she whispered, but her voice was lost in the confusion. I clicked to the next slide, another intimate photo, this one of Rebecca with Marcus Patterson. And this is Marcus, I continued, my voice still calm and measured. He was my best man at our wedding. He's also been sleeping with my wife for at least 2 years. Marcus bolted for the door, but several people blocked his path, staring at him with expressions of disgust and disbelief. His wife Sarah was staring at the screen in shock, her mouth hanging open. Kyle, please, Rebecca said louder this time. She started moving toward the laptop, but I stepped between her and the computer. We're not finished yet, I said. The next slide showed text messages between Rebecca and one of her lovers, discussing how clueless I was and how easy it was to manipulate me. These are some of Rebecca's thoughts about our marriage, I said, reading directly from the screen. Quote, Kyle is so focused on feeling guilty about the kids thing that he doesn't notice anything else. It's actually kind of pathetic how trusting he is. My mother was crying now. Rebecca's brother James was standing with his fists clenched, looking like he wanted to hit someone but wasn't sure who. The photographer Rebecca had hired was still taking pictures, apparently unsure whether she should stop. I continued through the presentation methodically. Each slide revealed another layer of Rebecca's deception. Photos with different men, evidence of her secret spending, documentation of how she'd used her volunteer work and book club as cover for her affairs. The weekend retreats, I explained as photos of Rebecca in various hotel rooms appeared on screen. The overtime shifts, the time spent comforting her divorced friend. It was all carefully planned deception to give her the freedom to pursue relationships with multiple men simultaneously. Rebecca was sobbing now, her beautiful blue dress stained with tears and mascara. She'd given up trying to stop the presentation and was standing in the corner, surrounded by the wreckage of her carefully constructed lies. Kyle, I can explain, she finally managed to say. Explain what? I asked. Explain how you systematically lied to me for 4 years? Explain how you used my guilt and love as tools to manipulate me? Explain how you made me feel like a failure as a husband while you were building relationships with other men? I clicked to the final slide, which was simply text on a black background, 22 years of marriage. 4 years of lies. The end. The room was completely silent except for the sound of Rebecca crying and my mother's quiet sobs. Thank you all for coming tonight, I said, closing the laptop. I hope you've enjoyed this celebration of our enduring love. What happened next was a blur of angry voices, slamming doors and shocked conversations. Most of the guests left immediately, too uncomfortable and embarrassed to stay. A few people tried to offer comfort or ask questions, but I wasn't in the mood for explanations. Marcus Patterson had disappeared entirely, presumably to go home and face his own marital crisis. Dr. Rodriguez and his wife left without saying a word, but I could hear them arguing in the driveway. Rebecca's family was devastated. Her brother James looked like he wanted to apologize on her behalf but didn't know what to say. Their parents, who had always treated me like a son, seemed unable to process what they'd witnessed. My own parents stayed until the last guest had left, then sat with me in stunned silence. "Why didn't you just talk to her privately?" my mother finally asked. "Why did it have to be so public?" "Because private conversations would have given her the opportunity to lie her way out of it," I said. "Rebecca is incredibly skilled at manipulation. If I had confronted her alone, she would have found a way to minimize the evidence, explain away the photos, and possibly even convince me that I was overreacting." My father nodded grimly. "I can't say I approve of your methods, son, but I understand your reasoning. What she did to you, it's unforgivable." After my parents left for their hotel, I found Rebecca sitting on our kitchen floor, still in her ruined blue dress, crying hysterically. "How could you do that to me?" she asked between sobs. "How could you humiliate me like that in front of everyone we know?" I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process the audacity of that question. "How could I humiliate you?" I repeated. "Rebecca, you've been lying to me for 4 years. You've been sleeping with multiple men, including my best friend. You've been using our marriage as a cover story for your affairs. And you're asking how I could humiliate you. It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said, which wasn't really an explanation or an apology. "How was it supposed to happen?" I asked. "Were you planning to eventually tell me the truth? Or were you just going to keep lying indefinitely?" She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. I filed for divorce the following Monday. Rebecca moved in with her brother temporarily, then found her own apartment across town. She resigned from her position at the hospital. Apparently, having an affair with a married colleague was against hospital policy, and the administration decided it was easier to let her go than deal with the scandal. The divorce proceedings took 8 months and were surprisingly straightforward. Given the overwhelming evidence of Rebecca's infidelity and her systematic deception, her lawyer advised her not to contest my requests for asset division. I kept the house, most of our savings, and my retirement accounts. Rebecca got her car, her personal belongings, and a relatively small settlement. The social fallout was extensive. Marcus Patterson's marriage ended within 3 months of our anniversary party. His wife Sarah filed for divorce and received half of everything, including the house they'd lived in for 15 years. Marcus moved to another state shortly after their divorce was finalized. Dr. Rodriguez faced an ethics investigation at the hospital and was eventually forced to resign. His 30-year marriage survived, but barely. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he and his wife went to counseling and decided to try to rebuild their relationship. Many of our mutual friends were forced to choose sides. Some supported me completely, understanding that Rebecca's behavior had been inexcusable. Others felt that my method of exposing her was too cruel and vindictive. A few people stopped talking to both of us entirely, apparently deciding that they didn't want to be involved in the drama at all. The hardest part was losing relationships that had nothing to do with Rebecca's affairs. Our neighbor Jake Coleman, who had been one of Rebecca's lovers, moved away within 2 months of the anniversary party. His involvement had been particularly painful because I'd actually felt sorry for him after his wife died, and Rebecca and I had brought him dinner several times and invited him to holiday gatherings. I later learned that Rebecca had started her affair with Jake just 6 months after his wife's funeral, apparently using his grief and loneliness as an entry point. The calculated nature of that manipulation was almost worse than the physical betrayal. But perhaps the most devastating discovery came 3 weeks after our divorce was finalized. I was going through some of Rebecca's belongings that she'd left behind, things she claimed she didn't want anymore, when I found a journal hidden inside an old nursing textbook. The journal entries went back 5 years, starting shortly after our fertility diagnosis. What I read in those pages changed my understanding of everything that had happened between us. Rebecca hadn't just fallen into these affairs by accident or due to some midlife crisis. She had deliberately and methodically planned her deception from the very beginning. The journal documented her research into how to conduct affairs without getting caught, her strategies for creating believable alibis, and her psychological manipulation techniques for managing my suspicions. One entry from 3 years ago was particularly chilling. Kyle is so predictable. His guilt about the fertility issue makes him easy to control. When I want more freedom, I just bring up how hard it is for me to be around other people's children, and he immediately backs off from asking questions about my whereabouts. He actually apologizes for not being able to give me the family I wanted, which gives me the perfect emotional cover for seeking fulfillment elsewhere. The key is to make him feel like he's failing as a husband, so he's grateful for any attention I give him and doesn't demand too much of my time or emotional energy. I've trained him to believe that my happiness depends on him giving me space to heal from our childlessness. It's actually quite brilliant. I get to pursue other relationships while he works extra hours to pay for my freedom. Another entry from about 18 months ago revealed the extent of her calculating nature. Had a close call today when Kyle found a receipt from the hotel in my jacket pocket. I told him it was for a conference room reservation for the book club, and he believed it without question. Sometimes I wonder if he's actually suspicious and just chooses not to investigate, or if he's really as trusting as he seems. Either way, it doesn't matter. I've been careful to establish patterns that give me maximum flexibility. The volunteer work provides cover for weekday afternoon meetings. The book club handles Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Weekend retreats give me entire blocks of time. And the Liz friendship is perfect for emergency alibis when plans change suddenly. The only challenge is managing the emotional demands of multiple relationships. Dr. Rodriguez wants more serious commitment, Marcus is getting careless about hiding evidence, and Trevor is starting to ask questions about my marriage. I need to be more careful about not letting any of them get too attached or demanding. Reading these entries was like discovering that the woman I'd been married to for 22 years was essentially a sociopath. Every emotion she'd expressed, every conversation we'd had about our relationship struggles, every moment of apparent vulnerability or connection had been carefully calculated manipulation. But the journal also revealed something else. Rebecca had been planning to leave me. The final entries, from about 6 months before I discovered her old phone, outlined her strategy for ending our marriage in a way that would maximize her financial gain and minimize the social consequences for her behavior. I need to be patient and strategic about this. If I file for divorce without cause, I'll only get half of everything and people might blame me for breaking up a long marriage. But if I can make Kyle appear to be the problem, maybe push him toward having an affair of his own, or get him to become abusive or controlling, then I can position myself as the victim. The ideal scenario would be for Kyle to discover one of my relationships and react badly. If he becomes violent or threatening, I can get a restraining order and probably take him for everything he's worth. Even if he doesn't react violently, I can probably spin his discovery of my affairs as evidence of his paranoia and controlling behavior. I just need to be a little less careful, leave a few more clues for him to find. Once he starts investigating, I can act shocked and hurt that he doesn't trust me, then use his spying as justification for wanting a divorce. The manipulation was breathtaking. She had been deliberately leaving clues, hoping I would discover her affairs so that she could use my reaction as grounds for divorce. My presentation at the anniversary party had actually been exactly what she was hoping for, except that she hadn't anticipated the scope of evidence I would present or the public nature of my revelation. Finding that journal was simultaneously devastating and liberating. Devastating because it confirmed that virtually everything about our marriage had been a lie. Liberating because it proved that I had made the right decision in exposing her publicly rather than trying to work through things privately. If I had confronted Rebecca quietly, she would have used my discovery as the foundation for her divorce strategy. She would have painted me as a paranoid, controlling husband who violated her privacy and didn't trust her. She might have even claimed that my behavior had driven her to seek comfort elsewhere. Instead, by presenting the evidence publicly and comprehensively, I had made it impossible for her to control the narrative or position herself as a victim. The journal also explained some of the strange behavior I'd noticed in the months before my discovery. Rebecca had actually been trying to get caught. She'd been leaving more obvious clues, taking fewer precautions, and creating situations that might lead to my discovering her affairs. But she'd underestimated both my trust in her and my commitment to handling the situation methodically rather than emotionally. A year after our divorce was finalized, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Rebecca had moved to Austin, Texas, where she'd taken a job at a smaller hospital. Apparently, the scandal from our anniversary party had made it difficult for her to find work in Orlando, where too many people knew the story. I also heard that she was dating someone new, a divorced doctor she'd met online. I wondered if he knew about her history, or if she was presenting herself as the victim of a failed marriage to a controlling husband. Part of me wanted to warn him, but I realized that wasn't my responsibility anymore. Rebecca's future relationships and the consequences of her behavior were no longer my concern. Meanwhile, I was slowly rebuilding my life. The first year after the divorce was difficult. I was angry, bitter, and suspicious of everyone around me. I threw myself into work, putting in even longer hours than before and taking on additional responsibilities that kept me busy and distracted. But gradually I began to heal. I started seeing a therapist who helped me process the trauma of discovering that my entire marriage had been built on lies. I joined a gym and got into the best shape of my life. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my marriage, and I discovered hobbies and interests that I'd set aside to accommodate Rebecca's schedule. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never found Rebecca's old phone in the garage that day. Would I still be married to her, unknowingly supporting her double life while she planned her exit strategy? Would she have eventually succeeded in manipulating me into a position where she could divorce me and take everything? Or would I have eventually discovered the truth in some other way, maybe when one of her lovers got careless or when she finally decided to leave me for someone else? I'll never know the answers to those questions, and I've made peace with that uncertainty. What I do know is that the presentation I gave on our anniversary was the single most important moment of my adult life. It was the moment I stopped being a victim and started taking control of my own story. Yes, it was dramatic. Yes, it was public. Yes, it was designed to humiliate Rebecca and destroy her ability to manipulate the situation to her advantage. But it was also honest, comprehensive, and final. There was no room for misunderstanding, no opportunity for her to twist the facts, and no possibility that anyone who witnessed it would believe her if she tried to claim that I was the problem in our marriage. Some people still think I went too far. They argue that I should have handled the situation privately, that I should have tried counseling, that I should have given Rebecca a chance to explain herself. But those people don't understand the level of manipulation and deception I was dealing with. They don't realize that Rebecca had been planning to use my discovery of her affairs as a weapon against me in divorce proceedings. They also don't understand that after 4 years of systematic lying, there was no explanation that could have justified or excused her behavior. The presentation wasn't about revenge, though I won't deny that there was some satisfaction in watching Rebecca's carefully constructed lies crumble in front of everyone she'd been deceiving. It was about truth. It was about making sure that the real story of our marriage was told before she had a chance to create her own fictional version of events. It was about consequences. Rebecca had spent years making choices that she thought would never be discovered or challenged. The presentation made sure she faced the full weight of those choices. And ultimately it was about freedom. By exposing the complete scope of her deception, I freed myself from any obligation to protect her reputation or minimize the impact of her behavior. 3 years later, I have no regrets about my decision. Rebecca got exactly what she deserved: the complete destruction of her carefully constructed web of lies and the loss of everything she had gained through her deception. I got something much more valuable: the truth and the opportunity to build a new life based on honesty and genuine connection. To anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, I offer this advice: don't let the fear of seeming vindictive prevent you from protecting yourself. Don't let misguided notions of loyalty or discretion allow manipulative people to control the narrative about their own behavior. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to make sure the truth is told, no matter how painful or embarrassing that truth might be. Rebecca thought she was smarter than me. She thought she could lie her way through life without consequences. She thought she could manipulate my love and trust to enable her betrayal. She was wrong about all of those things. And that presentation, those 10 minutes that destroyed 22 years of lies, proved it to everyone who mattered. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.